Hi, I'm Casey Seiler, editor of the Times Union. If you checked in early, you might have seen me scratching my dog, who just joined me. I'd like to thank for the companionship, but probably because there is a half-eaten sandwich right here on my desk. So thank you very much for checking in for another installment of our lunchtime Facebook Lives. It's been another week of good journalism by all of our staff, and I would like to point special attention to this outstanding healthcare heroes section that ran in Sunday's paper with this incredibly powerful photo from Lori Van Buren that she took at a local testing site on April 29th. There is very good stuff in the section, which is a kind of evolved version of our usual annual Salute to Nurses section. We decided that this year, of course, it would be very appropriate to expand it to more people in the healthcare realm. So well-timed, put together expertly as always by Gary Hahn and Jeff Boyer, and terrific journalism from many members of our staff, including Bethany Bump, our healthcare reporter, who, as you can imagine, has been doing triple, quadruple duty over the course of the last couple of months. I would also like to preview and recommend that folks check back in for what will be the third installment of our Back to Business webinar series. This happens at 9 a.m. tomorrow. This is a project that we have been presenting along with Hugh Johnson Associates on ways that businesses can stay alive and potentially rebound as the coronavirus crisis lifts. It's a free webinar. You can go to Times Union and Eventbrite to register for it. And it's going to be a very good discussion tomorrow on workforce issues. Once again, that's 9 a.m. on Tuesday. It will be streaming on our YouTube page as well as on Facebook Live. And if you go to timesunion.com just before it begins, you can get to it there as well. Same drill on Wednesday at 9 o'clock, when I will be taking part in a program called The Rebound, which is going to be a discussion with Don Levy, pollster, ace pollster, one of the best in the state for the Siena College Research Institute, about a joint Times Union Siena Research Institute poll that our outstanding Steve Hughes wrote about in Sunday's paper and Monday's paper. And of course, both of those stories are now available online, about a poll of more than 1,000 Capital Region residents, getting their sense of not only how the COVID-19 crisis has affected them, but also their attitudes towards coming back to work. What would make folks feel safe when they do begin to come back into the workforce, and also people's attitudes about how they think the next couple of months are going to play out in the Capital Region, about whether or not, for example, kids will be returning to school in the fall, whether big live events will take place over the summer, that type of thing. It's a fascinating poll. It gives you a good sense not only of where just sort of the general survey responses came down, but also the divides along gender lines and along political lines. So good stuff there as well, ably laid out in terrific graphics. With that, I would like to talk about something else that appeared in print in our Sunday paper that was, in fact, the centerpiece story, and once again is now up on timesunion.com. And that was a story from my friend and colleague, Amy Biancolli, from our features department on multiple generations of women who, along, of course, with a couple of the men in their lives, are living together on lockdown in Stephentown. And with that, I will bring in Amy if she can pop up. There she is. Amy, how you doing?
All right. How are you, Casey?
I'm good. So tell us about this story that was so appropriate to run on Sunday, on Mother's Day.
Yes, moms, multi-generation moms. Yeah, it's this wonderful family. They live in Stephentown. The Crouches, I found them via call out. I sent out basically a call out saying I need to find a family that's living together that has multiple generations of women. And somehow, I don't know how, but the family caught sight of my call out and responded. And it's basically, the youngest is a little girl, 3.5-year-old girl named Evalie, and her mom, Savannah Crouch, and then her mom, Kristen Crouch, and then Kristen's mom, who lives just a couple miles down the road, named Paula Selmer, and there is a man in there in the family, Kristen's husband, and Savannah's dad, Jerry, and Evalie's grandfather. But it was just such a fun story to talk to all these different women in different generations about what they've learned about motherhood and how they support one another. And the little girl was adorable. And I even did a little FaceTime interview with her. And as I told people afterward, it was the first time writing that story, the first time in 38 years of writing for newspapers. When I first started, I was like 18, 19. In all that time, the first time I've ever led a story with quotes from a 3.5-year-old. So, so it was a lot of fun. I mean, I certainly enjoyed talking to them and writing the story, and I was happy to do it.
And the message, which, as you noted, is kind of summed up in a sign that was a gift, I believe, to Kristen a couple of years ago, is strong women raise strong women who raise strong women. That these women are like everybody else. They're going through a lot, but it's sort of the bonds of family that are really kind of holding them together.
Yeah, really underscoring it was the bonds of family. And they talked about how nice it is just to spend downtime, because normally when families get together, and this is true across the board, not just of the Crouches, normally you have little reunions, usually pegged around some holiday when everybody's off, getting a turkey for Thanksgiving, or going to a pumpkin patch, or celebrating Halloween, or what have you, or birthdays. And this is just more an occasion for everybody to spend time with one another, which was nice.
It reminded me of a piece that appeared a couple of weeks ago from our former colleague, Jordan Carlio Evangelist, who is now spokesman for UAlbany. And he wrote, I thought, very, very movingly, almost kind of from the father's perspective in his case, but of course any parent would probably feel the same way. His children are fairly young, both of them under 10, I think. And he wrote about how he and his wife recognized that this is a time, the likes of which that they will probably not see again, at least hopefully, right? Yeah. That they will be kind of forced by circumstance to spend this amount of time kind of with their kids. And you can be upset by it, and you can regard it as a trial, which in many ways, of course, it is. But at the same time, there are opportunities there to deepen the experience, make the most of it, and kind of lean into it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, there's certain words that everybody keeps saying, repeating to one another, and the other is the idea of not so much a new normal or return to normal or a semblance of normal, but how we've all kind of had to craft something out of this new abnormal we're in. And we're all kind of creating new routines, and we're all engaging with one another in a different way. And like, I have my grown kids at home, and so we're all kind of, moving around the house with our laptops, and it's not anything I or anybody ever anticipated. But and another thing about the Crouches, each of them, when I spoke of the adult Crouches anyway, when I spoke with them, is that they all emphasized they didn't really want to say there were any silver linings, that any particular good came out of this, because people are getting sick, people are dying, people are struggling. And I think they're absolutely right. You can't say, oh yes, so much good has come out of this. It's impossible to say that when people are suffering. But at the same time, it's impossible also not to acknowledge that we are maybe appreciating one another in a different way, and maybe not taking things for granted that we had before.
Yeah. Speaking of the theme of taking things for granted, you have a second piece that appeared in Sunday's paper, and this was a column that you wrote about an aspect of the fiscal tsunami that is sweeping through local governments, state governments, and also nonprofit organizations, you wrote that arts funding, like funding for every other, nonprofit endeavor, is likely to suffer a significant haircut as the economic impact of the coronavirus crisis kind of sweeps out. That is, we're already hearing from, of course, a ton of nonprofits that they're very, very worried in a very existential way about what they might face. But you noted that the funding for the State Council on the Arts, it's got a $47 million annual budget. The vast, vast majority of that, all but I guess about $3 million, goes to direct funding for arts organizations and municipalities so that they can boost their cultural offerings.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's something like 93% of the budget goes to actual aid, direct aid. So I mean, and NISCA, as I tried to point out in the story, also it's gone through periods of intense struggle before, most obviously after the 2008 financial collapse. But the thing about the arts in general, about NISCA in particular, is that people, as you said, we tend to take it for granted, and it's not defined right now as one of the essential services. And of course it's not, because it's not in the front lines. It's not people. The artists aren't actually in the trenches treating people right now. But that said, I am so continually struck by ways large and small that we rely on the arts. And that's obviously, I mean, that's always true. That's always true of all of us. But we're, as with the family time, we're kind of brought face to face with it right now, because who really can get through this without the arts? And that's true always in the best of times, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, but it's especially true now. And I really worry, obviously, again, about all of these different arts organizations and artists and how they're going to recover. Are they going to recover? To what extent are they going to recover? On what timeline? How are people going to go back to live events? And how are they ever going to trust being in public with other people? And how are the little, mom and pop operations, the smaller arts organizations, how are they going to function? And I don't know. And NISCA really feeds those artists and arts organizations. It's been critical. So I do worry about it. And my hope is that maybe on some level, the governor and the legislature can acknowledge what's obvious, or should be, which is that we just can't get through this as a society, as human beings, without the arts. Because who can get through a day without watching Netflix? That's anybody. I don't know. Well, probably some people, but how do you? I don't know.
Okay, well, so with that in mind, we should also note that when I started at the Times Union, you were our film critic, and one of the best, without a doubt. So with that in mind, you mentioned Netflix, what are you binging? What perhaps old movies that somehow you have not managed to subject your family to them until now, are you subjecting your family to? Where are you finding kind of pop cultural comfort,
Well, it's funny you bring this up, because last night, being Mother's Day, I said, you can watch whatever you want, Mom. I'm like, An American in Paris. So we pulled up An American in Paris, which I love, and I can always, in good times or bad, Gene Kelly is one of my go-tos. But what I've been binging with the kids, I started out kids, my grown children who are back with me. I started watching The Sopranos, rewatching The Sopranos for them. They'd never seen it. Got through about 4 seasons off and on with them. Then I finally finished Watchmen, which was fantastic, and of course, very dark. And then with my boyfriend, I've been binging, speaking of dark, the German Netflix series Dark, which I highly recommend for anybody with a high tolerance for dark dystopian time travel dramas. It's definitely has spoken to me on some level that probably would be disturbing if I analyzed it. But beyond that, yes, I was one of the hundreds of millions of people who watched Tiger King. So
which I still have not watched, but
yeah.
I'm kind of holding that in my hip pocket, as it were. So
Well, be careful. Once you start, there's no stopping. That's the problem with it. Yeah.
I got to say, I loved HBO's Watchmen series. I thought that was terrific. And I am a fan of sort of the original comics from when they first came out. I started reading the original comics probably on issue 3 when the guy who owned my local comic book store in Louisville, Kentucky told me, you've got to check this out. It's a comic so good that you can get completely lost in it. And yeah. It's that kind of
world. And this is far better. I think the new series is far better than the film that came out 10 years ago or so. That adaptation. Oh yeah, this is way better than that. Yeah. But I have
it's not that the movie was bad. It was just the way I described it to somebody was like going back to a pizza joint that 20 years ago I had a fantastic pizza at, and I'm like, it's good, but it's not quite the same,
Yeah, exactly.
We should also note that you are, in addition to your other pop cultural concerns, perhaps the biggest Star Trek fan that I know, and a Trekker, not a Trekkie.
No, I'm a Trekkie.
I thought it was Trekker, though, was the term.
I don't understand that. I don't mince words. I'm a Trekkie, and I've never understood people who hesitate to call themselves Trekkies, because why apologize for it,
So one thing that has been noted about Star Trek is that its vision of the future is essentially optimistic, that while it presents a version of space that is, or, mankind's future, as well as every other, species depicted on Star Trek, that there's a lot of peril there and a lot of bad guys, that essentially it is a very new frontier, positive, optimistic vision of where mankind is going to be in a couple of centuries. Have you been thinking about that at all in this time of kind of global difficulty that just seems to be getting bigger and bigger with each passing week? I mean, do you ever think, oh man, Star Trek says we're going to get through this somehow?
Absolutely. No, I mean, I'm glad you asked that, actually, because one of the other series that that I've been dipping in and out of is Star Trek Enterprise, which is the least of the Star Treks. I have to say it. But I also
just came out that was like the CBS series that just came out a couple of.
No. Enterprise is the one with Scott Bakula, which is it's a bunch of noodle heads running the Enterprise. It's not the best Star Trek, but again, it's as its base, its principle, its overriding principle, its driving principle is this: humanity will figure it out. And Star Trek Discovery is one of the recent ones. That's superb. And Picard is also very good, the new ones. But no, I think that that's absolutely, I think now is the time for Star Trek, because it tells us that we can get through moments in history like this. I don't think Star Trek foresaw a pandemic, but it predicted, I think, a World War III at some point. There was some conversation, some piece of dialogue somewhere that talked about it. And the idea that we get through and we come out the other end, and that not just that, but that we have an innate goodness about us, decency, and that and the idea of infinite diversity and infinite combinations, acknowledging the importance of diversity and the significance of allowing each form of intelligent life a chance to say their piece. I mean, yeah, it's really corny. It's really, it's a little bit optimistic where we are now, but that's what we need, right?
Indeed. All right. Well, listen, I really appreciate it. Amy Biancolli, author of, among other books, Figuring Shit Out, Love, Laughter, Suicide, and Survival.
You said that. You said shit.
I mean, come on. Any kids on the Zoom call, I apologize profusely, but that's the title. And, in a time of crisis, I think these a certain level of social mores can break down. But anyway, I apologize to anybody who was offended by the use of that word, but it's a very good book, and it's a very good book once again about getting through tough times and coping. And I think it's worth the bad word to because I think there are a lot of people who would find a lot of common cause in that, and in your blog as well, that that kind of that builds upon many of the themes of the book. So
Well,
anyway,
thank you for
thanks a
mentioning
lot. I hope everybody in your household is doing well, about maybe a mile and a half from where I sit in my attic here. So
yes,
great.
and I hope you all are well and stay well, Casey. It's good to see you.
Thanks a lot. Good to see you too. All right, take care. And with that, I can't believe we haven't gotten any questions or outraged protests from Battlestar Galactica fans after spending that much time talking about Star Trek. But with that, I think we will wrap things up. Once again, I hope everybody watching this is doing well. Please remember to support local journalism, ideally, of course, by subscribing to the Times-Union, which you can do now for about $1 a week for, I think that the current deal is 52 weeks. I think that's straight. But of course, if you have, if you are zapping in from a distant place, I think you should support your journalism there as well. Once again, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I'll be moderating a discussion with local business folks on workplace issues as part of our Back to Business series. That's free. You can check in on YouTube or Facebook Live. And on Wednesday, I'll be talking about newly out Times-Union Siena College Research Institute poll with Don Levy, the pollster who runs that fine operation. Hope you'll check in there as well. Please visit timesunion.com for the latest news as it's breaking, and outstanding journalism like that perpetrated by Amy Biancolli. So with that in mind, I'm Casey Seiler, editor of the Times-Union. I hope everybody has a great day, and I hope this rain doesn't come back, but I think I'm not going to get my wish there. Anyway,